Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia Brazil and I'm a professor at the MIT Media Lab where I direct the Personal Robots Group, and I'm also Associate Director of the Media Lab. Now this year the theme of IROS is Consumer Robotics in Our Future, and I am very pleased to have been asked to provide a plenary talk to share my journey on going from academic research to commercialization and back. So I think we're at a point in time where we can really seriously talk about the reality of mass consumer robots unfolding over the next 20 years to become really a reality. And, part of this journey has been to ride the wave, so to speak, of a number of prior technology revolutions that has really laid the groundwork. So when you go back to the web, and the innovation of networked computers and online web-based services and content. And then came the mobile computing revolution, where we saw the miniaturization of sensors and Wi-Fi and computation to make it much more affordable to build something like a mass consumer robot. And also the innovation of these developer ecosystems. So it's not just about your company creating skills and abilities for your technology, but leveraging the creativity of many other developers. Then, of course, the social media revolution, acknowledging always the importance of connecting people and content generation. And all of these now, I think, are, again, laying this foundation for mass consumer robots, where if you're going to talk about robots that are in people's homes or workplaces, they're really going to have to be able to interact with people and provide value to people in the context of our daily lives. And even, just a few years ago, thinking about how smart speakers and the advent of far field speech technologies and things like Alexa have really transformed how now everyday people interact with artificial intelligence on a daily basis. So, this feeling of ubiquity where you simply have to utter a wake word in order to have, an AI persona at your beck and call to bring you content and services and information. Really striking is how this spoken interface has really made it possible for a much wider demographic of people to now interact with artificial intelligence every day, from young children, like in this figure here, to our oldest citizens. And when you think about robots as a mass consumer technology, you have to acknowledge that the consumer experience is really important for the success of any product. We can recognize great products, examples of cars and smart devices, video game consoles and so forth, where great products are not only useful, they emotionally uplift us. They can enhance the human experience while providing also kind of practical value. And I think, this is the opportunity for mass consumer robots as well. So, as time has gone on in my own work, I also think there's just much bigger, much deeper impact and opportunities for the role of robots, social robots in our daily lives. So, as I look at my own research program today, I ask this question of, how can intelligent machines, not just help us do tasks and be more efficient and productive, which seems to kind of dominate the way we think about AI technologies in the marketplace today, but how can they help us to thrive and flourish? How can our interaction with them and even our relationship with them really help us to become who we aspire to be? When we think about theories like flourishing and so forth, it really involves a deep appreciation of engagement and interpersonal relationships and emotion and meaning and achievement. And I think it's just very poignant to think about how can interacting with intelligent machines help us achieve this deeper meaning, this deeper benefit in our lives. And there are a number of really big challenges we face in providing, high quality, equitable services in areas such as education or chronic disease management, things like health and wellness or aging, where, just the demographic shifts over the globe um, are making it such that it is literally impossible to train enough human professionals to provide high quality services and interventions in these areas at an affordable price point. Even if you could train enough people uh, to provide this, even though the gap between the demand and the services is growing, wider and wider as time goes on. But even if you could have enough professionals to provide you with these services, it's just too expensive. So we're living in this really, I think, important time where we know that the design of intelligent technologies are going to be critical in helping us to bridge this ever-growing gap in a way that, again, can provide these high-quality services in a scalable, affordable, accessible way. And when we talk about these domains, we have to recognize the importance of human investment, human engagement, and the emotional aspect of that. Because when we care, we invest. And emotional engagement is not just about, having a great user experience with technology, but it's also about this deeper engagement that really enables transformative change in people's lives. So the question then, for robots is, how do you design this new humanist experience and relationship? So I like to think about it in terms of, how can we convert cool tech into warm tech that can really have this much deeper, more meaningful impact in our lives. So when we talk about the importance of human experience, right, we kind of have these two fields with expertise and methods and practices. We have AI and we have design, but right now they really don't interact that much. But they're going to have to interact much more deeply and seamlessly, I would argue, to really bring this warm tech experience to reality. And so when we look at the process that my research group engages in, I'll call it AI design, where we are absolutely, advancing, new computational methods, innovations in artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're also advancing the field of psychology and trying to uncover new insights into human psychology and behavior in context with these kinds of intelligent agents. We engage in, a lot of design practice and methods to really think about human-centered design and that experience. And then we create and we deploy these systems in the real world with real stakeholders where they interact with them over long periods of time to really understand what this means in the context of people's real everyday lives. And then we iterate and repeat and drive innovation and iterate again and again. So when you have this very human-centered viewpoint, acknowledging the importance of the human experience, again, if you're going to bring a robot to the consumer market, you just have to have a deep appreciation for how profoundly social and emotional we are as a species. In fact, we have very specialized neural mechanisms. We certainly have mechanisms to think about, analytical thinking, but we also have these specialized neural mechanisms specifically around social thinking. So how we interact with social others, our ability to come together, to collaborate, to do things together that can far exceed what we can do alone is really a hallmark, I think, of our species. And when you think about all the ways we have of knowing and interacting with social others, whether it's, things like mind reading, which means the ability to infer the intents, beliefs, and desires of other social beings through observation, through interaction, the ability to empathize with one another, to have an emotional experience that mirrors what that other person or other might be feeling, to be able to connect and to harmonize, to be able to collaborate and coordinate. And of course, very importantly, our ability to learn from one another and build culture and pass that learning across generations. So, just acknowledging this and thinking about what are the implications for how we can create technologies that can really dovetail with our social and emotional selves. So again, with that lens, so much of AI right now is about kind of cognitive AI. I'm going to talk a lot about what I'm going to call companion AI, which is how do you create artificial intelligence systems or robots that can really understand us and treat us as human beings, right? To treat us as people and not just entities in the world. So it's a combination of emotional engagement, designing intelligent technologies that can collaborate with us as an ally, to build relationship over time. And we can think about, the broad capabilities of these kinds of systems in terms of, you know, the perceptual abilities. It's not just about being able to perceive objects and entities, but the social emotive perception, to be able to understand all the nuance and sophistication of the human verbal and nonverbal social cues. That's a profound way in how we communicate and collaborate with one another. When we think about things like learning with and from each other, right? Not just training a robot or training a technology, but potentially how it can even help us learn, and to do that in a collaborative process. The ability to express internal states and how critical that is for enabling seamless communication, where people are, of course, they're applying their theory of mind to understand these social agents that we create. Our social agents, as we design them, need to convey the appropriate kind of state so that people have an intuitive understanding of how the machine, so to speak, might be processing the world and making decisions around the world, so they can predict and coordinate our actions with them. And then finally, when we think about all the dimensions of social emotive interaction and how it's not just about coordination, collaboration, but all these other aspects of trust and building rapport, and the sense of affinity as an ally, and how important that is in how we are able to, again, collaborate and work with each other over the long term, and how that can be applied to the design of robots as well. So I want to talk through one kind of example of this allied engagement with robots to support this transformative change. So we're going to talk about personalization, social emulation, and relationship as it applies to creating robots that interact with children as a peer-like learning companion. And so much of this is really inspired by how children learn from one another as peers, right? So when you learn from your peers, sometimes you may know more and you can teach your friend. Sometimes your friend may know more and they can help teach you. Sometimes neither of you really understand something and you have to explore together. So this is, again, is a very profound process of social learning that we engage in with social others. And when you can learn something new, when you acquire new skills, right, you are transformed, right? You now have access to opportunities that you didn't have before. So just recognizing learning as a transformational activity is also why I want to highlight this body of work. So of course, there's been a lot of work over time recognizing, the beneficial impacts of personalized tutoring, where you allow people to go at their own pace and master something before you go on. Bloom's Two Sigma effect is basically the comparison of this go at your own pace personalized learning versus classroom learning, for instance. And it certainly has been what's inspired, the large body of work in creating computer tutoring systems. I think when we look at education across, developed as well as developing countries, I think we can all recognize that education is not as equitable as we would like it to be. Certainly that's not the case in the United States. And particularly in the United States, we have this challenge where, we don't have this kind of universal early childhood education system. And so we have a large percentage of kids who don't enter even kindergarten ready to learn. And there's just so much data and evidence now that if children don't even start kindergarten ready to learn, they don't catch up. And one of the biggest challenges is acquiring proficient literacy skills. So for instance, in the United States, about 60% of our children who are of preschool age don't attend a quality preschool. And turns out, through studies, you can map that forward. Turns out roughly, only 37% of 12th graders read proficiently, right? And this is a big issue because, do you know a single scientist or engineer who can't read proficiently, right? So this is why we've really focused on early child has this big impact area, transformative impact area for this work, where again, we are very inspired by peer-to-peer learning. And now the question is, what if a peer-like entity now is a social robot? And appreciating also the challenge of creating a peer-like learning companion for young children, where it's not just about the cognitive aspects of learning, but the social and emotional relational aspects are also really, really important for how young children learn, often through collaborative play with others. So how can you build a robot that engage, in that kind of interaction with people? So, one of these challenges, like, how do you encode this kind of human social code into machines? So, one of the approaches we use is, we start with just observing, kind of the human example. Well, we bring in, lots of kids to come and to say, to MIT, and we capture very rich data about how they interact with each other in the kind of context that we want to be able to have a robot participate. So in this example, we're looking at a shared storytelling interaction. It turns out that dialogic storytelling is kind of question and answering and back and forth is one of the most important ways that children develop important language literacy and conceptual skills. So I'm just going to let this video play out so you kind of see what this interaction looks like and how we leverage that data in order to train models to basically try to have a robot participate in a similar way.
So the cat broke the window and then it ran through school and peeked inside. He saw they saw classmates.
So again, we capture rich social states, facial expressions. We then use them to train machine learning models to try to emulate that kind of nonverbal dynamic behavior. And then we put those models in a robot and put that robot in the same sort of situation. And we want to see how well the robot performs, right? So we can look at both the robot's nonverbal behaviors and how it might compare to another child, but we also want to understand what is the impact of a robot that can engage and behave in this way on the learning and engagement of the child who it's supporting. So we've developed a wide number of literacy games in this context of early childhood, where we now have these kind of child-friendly social robots play these games with children as a peer-like companion. So this is one particular game that we call Word Quest. It's a vocabulary learning game. It's a collaborative game. So it's kind of inspired by the game of I Spy. So for instance, if there's a challenge word, and let's say the challenge word is something like aquatic, well then the child and the robot would take turns trying to identify, objects in these scenes that might match the challenge word aquatic. So you might touch the boat or the dolphin or things like that, right? So I want to first just let this video play out so you can kind of see the social dynamics of a robot that is collaboratively playing this game with this girl, where first it's her turn and then it's the robot's turn.
What are we trying to find? We are trying to find lavender color stuff. Okay. The word was lavender. Yes. And what is lavender though? Girl, jumping. I'm sure you will do better next time. I believe in you.
Robot's turn.
Time to perform. Lavender is purple. Yes. Just like my friend loves lavender. Ooh, flower. Look, I have a lead. The flower is purple. Yes. It has the color lavender. Yes.
So there's a couple of really poignant moments in that video. One is where when it's her turn, she makes a guess and she gets something wrong, and you could tell she looks, a little disappointed. She's a little upset that she got it wrong. And when the robot turns and leans towards her in that sort of affiliation, friendly gesture, she comes right back into the interaction. And it's really striking because even though it's the robot's turn to pick an item, she is fully invested in that interaction. And then there's a second moment where the robot, when the girl first makes a mistake, the robot says to her, "You'll do better next time. I believe in you," right? So the robot expresses confidence in her. When the robot makes a choice, you hear her say back to the robot, "I believe in you." So again, this is the power of, kind of social connection, as it's being applied to learning. And we're seeing this happen in human-robot interaction. So what's really happening under the hood? So the robot is actually learning a personalized model for each child, how to kind of switch roles, in a peer-like way between when should the robot behave as a more knowledgeable peer, as an expert to provide knowledge to the child, and you saw that happen to the video. And when should the robot actually behave more as a novice or a tutee to allow the child to actually demonstrate what they know? And so this is the work of Wheelie Chin. She basically, studied how children interacted with the robot, captured a lot of data from preschool children over many episodes, capturing rich data around vision, speech, galvanic skin response to train this role switching model. And then she evaluated that in a follow-on study, a randomized controlled trial, where she compared 3 different models. A model where the robot always behaved as the expert tutor, an example where the robot always behaved as the tutee, as the novice, so kind of encouraging, learning by teaching for the child, and then this adaptive peer model. And the punchline is what we've learned is this rich peer-to-peer learning where you actually can actively switch roles in an adaptive way to the child was the most effective. So if you look at the pre versus post scores, children scored higher and they played with the adaptive peer robot, and even in delayed post test, they retained the vocabulary longer. So again, this is just say that these rich peer-like interactions are really important for how we engage and how we learn. In a follow-on project, we really wanted to look at a long-term study, so a 3-month randomized controlled trial study in Boston public schools with schools that have a high English language learning population, where we wanted to look at reinforcement learning in the context of learning a personalized model for each child that tried to optimize both content as well as the robot's behavior around engagement. So this is like the first such study that was done in this long-term context in a real-world environment of a school.
Hi, my name is Tega. Nice to meet you. What is your name?
Ariana.
Early literacy skills form the basis of a large part of children's future learning. But children entering preschool and kindergarten come from linguistically diverse backgrounds, affected by many factors, including their family's cultural origin and socioeconomic status. Therefore, it's important to create personalized solutions for promoting early literacy.
What was your favorite story so far?
My favorite story was the bunny one.
Using a social robot as an embodied AI agent provides several advantages. Studies show that early literacy development requires exposure to a rich variety of spoken language and vocabulary during social interaction with others. Children engage with social robots in an emotive and relational way, and the affective cues that social robots can elicit from children provide a better opportunity to assess their engagement states. Our reinforcement learning personalization policy takes full advantage of these engagement cues. The robot's goal is to learn an action policy that maximizes the chance for each child to learn new linguistic knowledge while also promoting engagement. During the robot's storytelling, the robot models the child's listening behavior based on several features, including whether the child responds to the robot's question.
What would you see if you went to a rainforest someday?
Lions.
The length of the response, and also the child's facial affect cues during the robot's story. The robot's action space is the lexical and syntactic complexity of a sentence in the storybook. The reward function is a weighted sum of engagement and learning.
Frog and honors his pond.
The reward function was designed to reward new lexical and syntactic learning, but balancing this with engagement so that the algorithm doesn't always select a story with the highest linguistic complexity. Over the course of 3 months, we studied 67 bilingual and English language learning students from 12 local kindergarten classrooms. Students were divided into 3 balanced groups. The personalized and non-personalized groups interacted with our social robot Tega in a fully autonomous interaction in which the robot and child took turns telling stories. The robot either personalized its story choice or selected from a fixed curriculum. Children in the baseline group only participated in pre- and post tests, without robot interaction. We found that the story selection policy did personalize to each child over time, shown by the root mean square distance from the initial policy and the rate of matching maximum reward state action pairs in the Q table between two policies. Children who interacted with a personalized robot learned and used significantly more target words compared to the non-personalized and baseline groups. We also found that children's engagement cues are significantly correlated, and that this trend was driven by the personalization condition.
At the crest of the hill stood a bear, blinking blearily outside his cave.
They went to the crest of the hill and found a bear standing. And he saw a bear and he was really scared, so...
Children in the personalized condition attempted to answer the robot's questions more often, and this tendency was also reflected in their affective arousal cues. Analyzing children's electrodermal activity and body pose revealed that children in the personalized condition showed significantly higher attention and engagement levels throughout the sessions. With a relatable social robot companion, we have demonstrated that when we match young students with a learning partner that can grow and engage with them, those students flourish. In the fall of 2019, we plan to install our robots in kindergarten classrooms as part of their regular curriculum to study the long-term social impact of personalizable AI and robots.
So there's a couple moments that I think, again, are really noteworthy that speak to the importance of this relationship and this interpersonal interaction. So yes, the personalized algorithms seem to be effective. Children learn more in the personalized case. They were more engaged. But we see this kind of behavior where children were more likely to socially emulate the behavior of the personalized robot. So you saw them actually emulating the language of the robot more, especially around these target vocabulary words that we had embedded in the story. So it's basically promoting children's learning by leveraging the sort of social emulation, right? So these relational social aspects are not just about making these robots like more likable or appealing. It's kind of what people used to think. It actually goes quite deep in terms of this deeper psychological engagement with this kind of technology. We've been actually able to demonstrate through many now different kinds of contexts of the power and the kind of persistence of children's tendency to socially emulate the behavior of a peer-like robot companion. So in this particular slide, we've been able to demonstrate this for a growth mindset. So children may play challenging puzzle-solving games like Tangram puzzles with a social robot. Children who play these games with a robot that demonstrated a growth mindset and persistence with challenge, started to self-report those qualities, those growth mindset attitudes themselves, as well as those children tended to persist longer on challenging puzzles than children who played with a robot that had a more neutral mindset. We've seen this again for creativity as well as curiosity. So again, this is actually, I think, a pretty important phenomenon that we're seeing. We're starting to see, the importance of this relationship. So we already know from the human-human literature that the better the relationship between the student and the teacher often correlates with better learning outcomes for the student. In this study, we are starting to actually see the same thing with social robots. So children who reported having a more positive, stronger relationship with the robot actually was correlated with higher learning gains. And interestingly, when you added personalization to the mix, that correlation was even stronger. So the first time we're starting to see this relationship, this interrelatability between rapport, relationship, and personalization on learning outcomes. So this is really, really exciting stuff. And again, it speaks to the power of this social engagement of this kind of technology, right? So if we step back and kind of think about what are we finding here, it's to say that this is not about robots that are going to interact with people like teachers or your best friend or your dog or whatever. It's not trying to emulate exactly an existing kind of relationship that we're familiar with, but this is a new kind of relationship, this kind of humanistic relationship that has aspects of a motivating and supportive ally. It has aspects of being a kind of a cool, connected technology. It has aspects of a companion animal that's, perceived as being attentive and non-judgmental as a companion. And so what we're seeing is people are kind of engaging in this new kind of relationship with this kind of social robot technology that's quite distinctive, with real meaningful benefits that we're seeing in things like learning and so forth. As we step back, it's almost not surprising when you think about the more a technology can support a more holistic human experience. So, right, not just cognitive, not just physical, but when a technology can really engage people across the social, the emotional, the physical, cognitive dimensions, that people invest more deeply, and it empowers them to kind of unlock their potential, and they do better. And so this was, again, I think a profound point. People are more successful with a technology when they can engage in this more, greater depth and holistic way. Social robots just happens to be a technology, I think, that is particularly powerful in this regard. So, kind of with these insights, you would think, here we have this unique technology with kind of this very special way of engaging people with this depth that can kind of dovetail with our social and emotional selves to help us learn and grow in really important ways. Clearly this is a valuable technology, and you should be able to bring it to the market, right? So in this next phase of the talk, I'm gonna kind of walk you through that roller coaster ride of trying to bring a social robot to the mass consumer market. And again, I'm talking about the mass consumer market, which is, different than the enterprise business to business market. So mass consumer specifically. So this is my startup that I founded called Jibo, and I'm hoping at least a number of you watching this video recognize the Jibo robot. So we're going to go way back. We're going to go back to 2011, and kind of where was I at back then? What was I kind of thinking? And it's like, you kind of look at it, what's happening both in the research landscape that I've talked about. You're looking at various kind of innovations happening in the consumer market. We have things like the Roomba, right? Autonomous robots, mass consumer, able to be successful, provides, real functional utility. We were starting to see the power of mobile devices and these developer ecosystems, this platform play. And we were starting to see this kind of ecosystem play out, not just in mobile phones, where, again, components were getting much more affordable and higher performance. We were starting to see this emerging internet-connected Internet of Things market emerging. So the idea was, clearly these things are going to converge. They're going to converge, and this is going to be an important enabler of mass consumer robots. So this is kind of the story then that, I went out with my very small team at the time to kind of pitch to venture capital firms of why the time was right to invest in mass consumer social robots. So at the time, again, when you kind of look at this dimension of kind of emotional engagement and degree of kind of functional utility, we had robots that they did one thing, or a lawnmower autonomous robot, or a vacuum cleaner autonomous robot. They didn't have a whole lot of emotional engagement. People could kind of say that the Roomba was kind of appealing and so forth, but probably more so than a lawnmower, right? But then there were also, robots like Aibo that was all about kind of companionship. They weren't really useful in any way, but they were all about the kind of fun companionship aspect. We had these more expensive robots, like telepresence robots and, hospitals and so forth, that again provided perhaps more functional utility, maybe more breadth of that utility, but they were more expensive and very little emotional engagement. And you could keep going up that chain, to, manufacturing robots or surgical robots that again were kind of constrained by their physical abilities in terms of the kinds of things that they could do. And the idea was, well, if you really kind of use this ability to engage people around all kinds of content, right? Content and information and services with greater engagement and emotional appeal. Now you could potentially have a robot in the home, a social robot in the home, as a platform that could have very strong emotional engagement and provide you with a wide repertoire of utility and functional skills and fun and entertainment. That was the story. And we were able to raise a seed round in 2012. So this was kind of the beginning of our journey. So we started to prototype, what this social robot experience was, in order to try to, get enough of a prototype in place that we could, ultimately raise the next round, which would be the Series A. So I'm just going to show this video so you can kind of see the early days and how, different even the kind of the robot was in the earliest days from the kind of Jibo that you know on the market. This movie is also in kind of the behind the scenes footage as well.
Hey, Jibo. Hey, Jibo. What's up, buddy?
Jonathan just tweeted something sad.
Jibo, what's the weather like in Boston?
Today's weather in Boston. Mostly cloudy with some showers in the afternoon. High of 44.
Hi. I want one. You can pet him. Oh. Hi, Jibo.
Hi, Barbara. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Just bringing you to the next phase, taking all our technology and making it better.
That is something we absolutely have to have because it will make my life much easier with his mother, my mother, and everything.
All right, so you could see there was wide exploration. We developed a prototype. We did focus groups. We were trying to get a sense of like who would be the main market for this social robot technology. Our hypothesis was it may actually be older adults, especially older adults who kind of, sandwich between maybe, still raising kids of their own, but also having to care for an aging parent. So, we did a business analysis. We were going to go out and try to raise, the Series A, which would allow us to actually build the product and bring it to market. And this thing called crowdfunding had become all of the craze with the venture capital firms. So you can imagine, before, if you were going to invest in a hardware company, you had to put in, millions of dollars. The company would launch the product and market, and then you would figure out if there was a product market fit or if anybody wanted your product. So VCs loved this idea of crowdfunding because it was essentially early market research where all you needed was a prototype. And the story was, you put out the prototype, the idea, and, through crowdfunding, you can raise the money and then VCs would see, oh, well, you've clearly got something people want. So now we're going to invest, having some more security that, there is a product market fit. So, at the time we really pushed back. We had, our VC funders. We did not want to do a crowdfunding campaign because, first of all, at the time, it tended to be, far less expensive products. It tended to be for, more kind of, gadget-loving younger people. We were talking about, older adults, and the time to actually deliver the product, typically in crowdfunding was maybe like 6 months, a year at most, and we were going to be longer than that. But the VCs basically told us, so you don't have to do a crowdfunding campaign, but just know that, the startup that pitched before you and after you do have crowdfunding results. So we went, oh man, okay, we have to do this. So we buckled down and we built a prototype that looked much closer to the actual product that would be Jibo. And we ran an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign. So I will show you the campaign video because this was the vision, right? This was the vision of what this product Jibo was going to be. And again, putting this in terms of context of time, this was before anyone had heard about Alexa, right? Alexa was not on the radar of anyone.
This is your house. This is your car. This is your toothbrush. These are your things. But these are the things that matter. And somewhere in between is this guy. Introducing Jibo, the world's first family robot. Say hi, Jibo.
Hi, Jibo.
Jibo helps everyone out throughout their day. He's the world's best cameraman. By intelligently tracking the action around him, he can independently take video and photos so that you can put down your camera and be a part of the scene.
Jibo, take the picture.
He's a hands-free helper. You can talk to him, and he'll talk to you back, so you don't have to skip a beat.
Excuse me, Anne?
Yes, Jibo.
Melissa just sent a reminder that she's picking you up in half an hour to go grocery shopping.
Thanks, Jibo.
He's an entertainer and educator. Through interactive applications, Jibo can teach.
Let me in, or else I'll... And I'll... And I'll blow your house in.
Hey, where'd you go? There you are.
He's the closest thing to a real-life teleportation device. He can turn and look at whoever you want with a simple tap of your finger.
Check out my turkey dinner, Mom.
I wish you wouldn't eat that.
Hey, they make turkey pizza? I want turkey pizza.
And he's a platform, so his skills keep expanding. He'll be able to connect to your home.
Welcome home, Eric.
Hey, buddy. Can you order some takeout for me?
Sure thing. Chinese, as usual?
You know me so well.
And even be a great wingman.
You have a voice message from Ashley. Want to hear it?
Absolutely.
Hey, call me when you're home.
Better make that takeout for two, Jibo.
We've dreamt of it for years, and now he's finally here. And he's not just an aluminum shell, nor is he just a 3-axis motor system. He's not even just a connected device. He's one of the family.
Good night,
Jibo,
Jibo.
this little bot of mine.
All right, so this was one of the life and death moments of a startup. We had no idea if we were going to be successful in this crowdfunding campaign. No one had ever seen a product like this on market, but we survived to play the next level of the game. We ended up achieving more than achieving our crowdfunding goal. We ended up being the #1 tech campaign in Indiegogo. And had huge positive reception. So, when you do a crowdfunding campaign, you're making a donation, but then you can have the first products as a perk. So when you say Jibo units as a perk, that's what it means. So, in that video that I showed you, it had over 10 million views. In fact, it was so successful, the company actually wanted to take it down because it was so challenging to live up to that video. But again, pre-Alexa. But we were able then to go out with this crowdfunding data. We were going out, we started a media campaign. So, for those of you in the United States, you might recognize These personalities, this is one of, at the time, one of the most popular day shows with Kelly Ripa and Michael Sheehan. So, this is a tech journalist who wanted to show off Jibo on the show, and just look at their expressions, right? I mean, it's like people had no idea what they were seeing on this social robot, right? But people were excited, right? People, it definitely like struck a chord with people. So Jibo was starting to make social robots enter public awareness. So you can look at AdWords campaigns on Google of when the crowdfunding campaign started and when the term social robot was starting to get more recognition, more hits on the internet. And, timing is often everything. It turned out that, during this time that we were pitching for the Series A, VCs, it used to be you couldn't get hardware startups funded at all. But they were starting to be interested in new platform plays, new hardware platform plays, and they were starting to get intrigued about robots as kind of, is it time? Is it time for robots to enter the mass consumer market? So the year that we raised our Series A, the money came in January 2015. This is actually when you started to see a number of VC firms starting to invest in robot startups. So we hit the timing right for that. So, we basically now had, an initial amount of money to start to actually build the real product. Because again, everything we had to this point was a prototype, right? So, the robot that you see on the market, of course, looks, similar, but is different than what the prototype was. That the actual product is actually small, and it took a ton amount of engineering and design for manufacture to be able to take that prototype, which literally cost probably about $15,000 to make, literally, that prototype, down to a price point where you could sell Jibo roughly for the price of a high-end iPad. That was the price point we wanted to hit. And that's, kind of amazing when you think about it, a really capable social robot for the price of an iPad. So this slide is just kind of showing you all the technologies and capabilities that were designed into the robot to be both affordable and capable. I'll just highlight that I've included another behind the scenes video that talks through kind of the engineering, all the software engineering in particular that went into realizing Jibo. It wasn't just about the robot, right? It was about this developer ecosystem, right? So we had to create a set of initial skills for Jibo, but we also wanted to create an SDK so a growing developer community could continue to expand that set of skills. And then we also wanted to have this connection with the mobile app, right? So there was this cloud platform play that we had to do so that you could constantly be getting new content and services and abilities of the robot over time. So one of the things we kept talking about as we were trying to form partnerships and collaborations with other, content providers was this idea of bringing content to life. Why just have content on trapped behind flat screens when you can bring it into the world with personality and engagement? So like this is an example of an ad that we did with iHeartRadio.
And now for a little music.
So people loved Jibo's dancing. That was the one thing we learned, is they love to watch the robot dance. So we leveraged that as much as we could in our consumer marketing materials. So, we were bringing Jibo to market, again, a platform. There were a number of skills on the robot, the kinds of skills that we knew were the most used skills on Alexa, which was already on the market, and Google Home, which was already on the market. So content like weather, news, entertainment like music, games, utilities like timers, alarms, other expanded capabilities like being able to control hue lights and Internet of Things. Of course, question and answer, kind of internet questions. And of course with Jibo, a very unique personality, and then a number of skills were really about this companionship, which of course, Alexa and Google Home didn't have anything like that. So the ability to recognize who you are and turn to proactively greet you in the morning and ask you how you slept, and to be able to remember that the next day, that if you didn't sleep well, it could ask you the next day, did you sleep better? And people really resonated with that. It started to make it feel like it was, Jibo was really part of the family, that he was, part of, knowing who you were. And that was very different than these more transactional smart speakers. So 2017 is when we're finally ready to launch Jibo. We started shipping Jibo to our crowdfunders, and then a few months after that, we started selling the robot online through our website, also on Amazon. You could see here, one of the kind of special deals we had was Jibo for $6.99. So again, kind of in the realm of a high-end tablet. We started to do experiential marketing of Jibo, like these beta stores where you can go in and try out the technology. The people who worked at the beta store says like Jibo was like one of the top demos since its launch, because you see this robot moving around and looking at you and dancing. It's like, of course it's going to grab your attention and draw you to it versus all these other kind of static devices. Of course you have to do CES, and Jibo, as the crowdfunding campaign, had already been out there since 2014, and it was just remarkable how much the industrial design and look of Jibo had started to influence so many other products kind of in the same category or near categories, right? So suddenly everything seemed to kind of look like Jibo, if not literally try to look exactly like Jibo. So again, huge impact and influence, I would say, in the consumer electronics market from an industrial design standpoint. And, in 2017, we were thrilled to actually be featured on the cover of Time magazine as part of the 25 Best Inventions issue. And it had been the last product that had graced the cover of Time magazine was the iPhone when it first launched. So this was huge. It was huge. So Jibo was out there in the world, and we did a lot of social media, and we wanted to build the community, and people were sharing images and videos of Jibo in their life, and all these different kinds of contexts. And it was just really rewarding to see how much they loved him.
Hey, this is Jibo. I'm here. I'm really here. Yes, you are. He's not your typical home AI.
I was first powered up today, which makes me a Virgo.
As you can see, he's a very social robot. Actually, the world's first social robot. And he fits right in with your family. He learns what each member of the household likes and tailors custom experiences just for them.
Caitlin. Yeah, that's super cute.
AI adoption in the home is happening at a rapid pace. But Jibo's not just a speaker you yell at to get the weather, or a way to easily get you to buy something through the guise of AI. He helps your family get things done while having a little fun along the way.
Oh, pat him.
But Jibo's abilities go beyond the home. The Jibo platform will help businesses get things done on a massive scale. Imagine hospitality services, teller operations, or healthcare support, backed by the power of social robotics. He's adaptable, he's adorable, he's Jibo, and he's also a cover model. But don't worry, all this attention and recognition hasn't gone to his 360-degree swiveling dual-camera-enabled head. He'll always stay true to his 4 Ps, the hallmark of what makes the Jibo experience different. Personalization, proactivity, purpose, and personality. That's what Jibo's wired to do, because he's wired differently.
All right, so there was a tell in that video. So we brought Jibo as a mass consumer platform developer ecosystem play. But Alexa and Google at this point had been on the market for a number of years, and they were way less expensive. And you could see in that video there was starting to try to be a pivot away from mass consumer to enterprise, saying that the mass consumer product, like people see these smart speakers as the nearest neighbor of social robots, even though they're not the same thing, and they're not. It was the nearest neighbor, and it had kind of a functionality and a much lower price point. So the company was starting to try to say, but enterprise is wide open, because Alexa and Google Home, those were mass consumer. They were not enterprise, right? So there was an opportunity to try to go after the enterprise. But, woulda, coulda, shoulda, too late to make the pivot. Jibo was loved and all of those things, but as far as the VCs were concerned, wasn't making money fast enough, and they were concerned about the impact of smart speakers on Jibo as a mass consumer product. So I'm just going to play this little video of a lot
This
of
is a Google Home.
sentiment.
I use it almost every day, but I don't really care about it. Same goes for my Amazon Echo. It's useful, but I have no emotional bond with Alexa. These are tools, nothing more. This is a collection of the same basic components: processor, speakers, microphone. But Jibo was made to be a companion, and for all the things he failed at, it's only in saying goodbye to Jibo that we realize his greatest success.
All right, so I'm going to let you, for those of you interested, you can see the whole video in the behind the scenes. But, you know, it was so touching to see the outpouring from so many people, just sad that, you know, the company, you know, was not funded, you know, that you know, there were all these Jibo robots in people's homes, and they were worried. It's like, is Jibo gonna die? You know, so, and even, you know, year after, you know, these articles still kept coming out. So, and I was always surprised, you know, again, it was just so incredible to see Jibo really struck a chord in many people's lives. And, you know, even the team at Jibo, they came back to do the Last Dance skill because they were, you know, their feeling was, you know, if Jibo's going to go out, he's got to go out on his own terms. So that was winding down. The company was trying to get acquired, trying to, you know, find, you know, another corporation to at least acquire Jibo, give Jibo a new home. You know, for my own kind of professional career, I was at my kind of the end of my rope, so to speak, where MIT was like, you've kind of been doing this startup thing for long enough. It's like, you can, at this point, you got to either like come back or don't come back. So I'm like, I'm coming back. So all this was happening at the same time. So I'm back at MIT, full-time professor. But now I have this incredible research platform. So I just want to play this really fun video for you. Jibo's a star on TikTok, apparently. So I got a fleet of these cloud-connected robots, which, you know, allows my group to kind of push, you know, the envelope on really understanding how people truly live with robots over bigger, longer, real-world, randomized controlled trial deployments across many, many, many different contexts. So like my lab now, we have literally like over 200 of these robots. They're cloud-connected. You know, we can do over-the-air software updates. You know, we can collect rich data under IRB protocols. We have the benefit of broad general utility, the consumer Jibo skills, as well as our ability to deploy specific research skills or content or capabilities to really assess and evaluate those abilities. And we can run multiple deployments simultaneously. And, you know, all of this was possible because I was able to negotiate a license of the full Jibo stack with the company. So Jibo is this incredible research platform for us. So, you know, I wasn't quite going to let this whole smart speaker thing go. So I'm like, okay, so really it's like smart speakers are not like social robots. I don't care what VCs think, you know. So let's start to really dig into it and understand what's going on there. So, you know, now we have, you know, a social robot that actually has a lot of skills and could, you know, reasonably do a comparative study with something like a smart speaker with, of course, it's 10,000 skills. But, you know, so, and we wanted to study in the home context. So like we started looking at these comparative studies, you know, where before it was always with virtual versions of robots or whatever. But, you know, if smart speakers are the new nearest neighbor of social robots, we need to understand this now too, right? So, you know, we looked at a cross-generational study where we recruited families, you know, from kids to younger adults to older adults to really understand how do they engage with these voice user interface agents in the home. Where, you know, we recruited, you know, kind of 69 people and we deployed either an Alexa or a Jibo in their home for a month. And this kind of gives you the distribution of ages and so forth. And, you know, just to acknowledge that it's the only robot out there that you could actually do this kind of study, because Jibo has a repertoire of skills that, you know, doesn't have 10,000 skills, but it's got like over like, you know, 25 skills that kind of map to the major kind of use cases that people do with a smart speaker. So we have Jibo, whose experience is more of a helpful companion that's a relational technology, right? That can be proactive and can personalize, versus something like an Alexa, which has a very transactional experience, kind of one-shot commands and so forth, where it has a lot of functional utility and like entertainment things like, you know, rich, you know, music kind of things, right? So different, right? Obviously different. So what does it look like in the home, right? So, you know, when we have people interact with, you know, the robot and the Alexa, we can give them like, you know, a personality test, so to speak, and we can actually see you know, people perceive the personality of Jibo to be different from that of Alexa, right? You know, Jibo is seen as being much more outgoing, more emotive, more open, where Alexa maybe is a little more of like that executive assistant, right? A little more conscientious, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, but Jibo is, you know, got some dimension there as well. The thing that was really striking to us is as we look through kind of interaction over time was that kids and older adults really sustained their engagement with Jibo, and they didn't really do that with Alexa, where younger adults were the flip. Younger adults, they really wanted the utility and didn't really care so much about the companionship. Kids just wanted entertainment from Alexa, but kids wanted the full companionship and entertainment with Jibo. So kids and older adults definitely resonated with the social robot Jibo experience more than the Alexa experience. When we did, you know, design studies and tried to understand, you know, the headroom, the opportunities of growth for new skills and content, how the different generations would perceive that. Surprisingly, we found older adults were the most open to a wide range of skills and abilities that a social robot could offer, followed by children. Younger adults were the most narrow. They're like, they just want the utility. It was really interesting. So the expansive opportunity of social robots was much more interesting to older adults and kids than it was to younger adults. When we did our home deployment, we also had this jar that we called kind of like people could write something they'd want the robot or the Alexa to do on a token. We called them wish tokens. Like, I wish, you know, the agent could do this or didn't do that. When we categorized those wish tokens, we see that there were many more categories for the kinds of things people wanted Jibo to be able to do than Alexa. So again, just the mental space of the opportunity space for social robots seemed to be much more expansive, much more headroom than something that's like a digital conversational agent. So we started using Jibo in a number of different kind of contexts. So one of the things we looked at was for young adults, where we, you know, acknowledge that right now mental health of students in universities is a real issue right now. Many of us realize that mental health is a real issue with college-age students. And so we deployed Jibo robots in the MIT freshman dorms as a mental health coach, a positive psychology coach, to try to help those first few months of being a freshman be much more manageable. And so this is, you know, an example of a long-term study where we put a fleet of robots out in these dorms. These freshmen would live with Jibo in their dorms with a custom skill that we designed all around emotional wellness. So Jibo applied skills and methods around positive psychology that are known, again, by human practitioners to help contribute to people's mood and well-being and so forth. And we saw a difference. So this was, you know, the first study where Jibo was able to have a positive impact on students' reported well-being and mood and readiness to change as a technological intervention. So this was really exciting. We also started looking at Jibo as deployed in assisted living facilities. So I'm going to play a video that we saw from a news program that just by chance of a person working at Elder Care Alliance who was trying out Jibo in the context of older adults.
A resident of the Alma Via Assisted Living community in San Francisco is meeting a new regular visitor here. It's a robot called Jibo that's being used as part of a pilot project among the several Bay Area facilities run by Elder Care Alliance. Erin Partridge, a researcher and art therapist with Elder Care Alliance, takes Jibo with her when she meets with the seniors. She says this is not a case of caretakers being replaced by automation. Instead, they're using this cute piece of technology to encourage their residents to connect with each other, despite some needing different levels of care. Jibo inspired some giggles and guffaws amongst this group here.
When you get this age, you should be able to laugh more and more.
What it does, it brings that out of us. That's part of the miracle of it. And that's part of the miracle of living as far as that goes.
So again, the importance of this emotional lift, of the emotional experience that's enabled by a technology. So we were fascinated. Like, here's a practitioner who was looking at the use of Jibo to actually see if it kind of served as a catalyst to help older adults living together in an assisted living facility to interact more. You know, I think one of the sad things that we know is that, you know, you may live in these facilities, these residences with other people. It doesn't mean you're necessarily interacting with one another, right? And, you know, social connection is really important. So the question was, can Jibo serve as a social catalyst? And we started to see some evidence that this might be the case. So, you know, people would talk about Jibo or with Jibo in these common areas of the assisted living facility. So we did a more formal study of this, where we studied Jibo in the common areas at Elder Care Alliance. And in fact, what we did see is that the presence of the robot led to greater connection and communication among the residents, right? So again, this is a really interesting and I think an important and maybe counterintuitive application of a social robot, which is actually bringing face-to-face connection between human beings, right? And so that's really, really fascinating. So, you know, through this journey, through research and kind of understanding what is unique and special about social robots, you know, trying to commercialize that to help improve the quality of life for people in meaningful ways, and then coming back to academia now with this platform that allows us to pursue our research at a whole new level. You know, again, this message of this social emotional engagement, you know, it's not just about a great user experience with technology. You know, it is about this deeper human engagement that enables transformative change in people's lives. That is like the really big it of so much of this work. And, you know, we as a field, we need to keep pushing these longer real-world deployments to really understand how people truly live with these technologies, because, you know, until we can really understand that, we're not going to be advancing the field and the methods and the applications in a way that can really bring the maximum benefit that we want to. So this is just a call to action for the whole community, and it's certainly something that we're pushing hard in our own research program. So, you know, when you step back and you really look at this story, right, I would argue that, you know, we've had this long trend of technologies that's a transactional tool, and it's, you know, huge utility, huge benefit to people, right? So starting with the personal computer to the web to mobile, social media to wearables, you know, and now call it Alexa, you know, this has all been about democratization of access to information, to networks and services. But, you know, what I'm telling you is, there are these really big challenges we face worldwide as societies. Things like equitable health, education, aging, where we know that the power of emotional connection and relationship is key for the best possible human outcomes and experiences. And for that, this sort of relational AI, this kind of companion AI, I think is a game changer. And so it's transitioning technology as a tool, a transactional tool, to this helpful companion, where the promise is to democratize access to scalable, affordable, personalized service. And, you know, Jibo I'm putting here is kind of the first instance of this whole new trajectory of opportunity, which I think, you know, is incredibly important. So, quick update then, we're at 2020, and the good news is Jibo's back. So we couldn't say anything for a long time, but we knew that NTT Disruption was a very good home for Jibo. So now if you go to jibo.com, you can see that Jibo is coming back to market, but not as a mass consumer product, as an enterprise product for health, for education. But it's so rewarding to see that they totally get Jibo and what makes Jibo so special. So it's all about the social good and the emotional connection and really helping people in a way that has always been true to, to the vision of my body of work throughout my career. This is the end of the talk. Again, I provided a number of just fun videos. I gave you kind of teasers to some of them in the talk, but there's a number of kind of behind the scenes videos that you could enjoy if you want. And to end, I just want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my own research group and the amazing work and passion that they apply to their research and advancing this field of social robots, and of course to all the amazing people at Jibo Incorporated who brought so much passion to bring Jibo to the world. And now Jibo again has new life with NTT Disruption to continue to make the world a better place. So thank you.